Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We're your host, Atlas Alex, and we're glad that you could join us this afternoon on this gorgeous sunny day where we are in Ontario, Canada, just 45 minutes west of Toronto. And today we are going to be looking at sacrifice and suffering again. But we are going to be looking at it from a different angle, a different perspective. Because since roughly the beginning of the year, it seems that our live streams have been naturally and organically progressing. None of it has been planned by me, of course, but you know that because Attlas is behind what we do anyway. And we don't know ahead of time what our topics will be. We go through the entire week not knowing what we're going to be talking about on Sunday. That said, we have to be mindful and aware of everything that shows up during the week because everything happens for a reason. And very often, events during the week, sure enough, they happen to us because we need to talk about them on Sunday. They're apropos to the topic that is given to us on Sunday to talk about. And that's very much the case again today. But also the fact that last week was Easter. And last week we were speaking of the path of the Bodhisattva and the practical lessons that Easter teaches us, namely the tremendous suffering and sacrifice that Master Abbottamento endured, that we know, the world knows better as Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, his crucifixion and resurrection, but also his ministry. And as we explained last week, and we posted today as a snippet, as a little clip, how through his suffering and sacrifice, he was able to change the game for this humanity. He was able to arrange with the lords of karma the ability to negotiate one's karma, or also be able to have some karma forgiven. Not all karma, but some karma. And since the beginning of the year, we have spoken a lot about suffering and sacrifice. We've spoken a lot about the challenges and obstacles that we face in order to develop. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. The same mountain that seems to be trying to kill us is actually assisting us to the peak, assisting us in conquering it. So much of our perspective on suffering and sacrifice has in fact been introspective. How does our suffering and sacrifice affect ourself, our being, and our development along the path? But of course, if we only look at it from that point of view, then the path of the Bodhisattva would arguably and cynically be seen as something very self-serving. That the only reason why a being chooses that path is for selfish reasons. But of course, that couldn't be further from the truth. That is not the case at all. The path of suffering and sacrifice for humanity is exactly what it sounds like. And even in your own life, you know deep down that the greatest satisfaction that we receive in life is helping others and sacrificing for others, giving to others, serving others. If you like to host dinner parties, or even if you just like to cook, or you like to play bartender when your buddies come over to watch the game or whatever. If you're that type of an individual, you relish the opportunity. Likewise, you might be a mother or a very nurturing type individual, and you're constantly fretting over and assisting and nurturing others. And you're always seeking that opportunity. And when you get that opportunity, it's like something inside you comes alive, because it's practically what you live for, to take care of people. And there are many, many, many individuals who fall into this category. They're natural born caregivers. It's what they do best. It's what gives them the greatest amount of joy. And many of these individuals, if they know themselves and they're wise, choose careers or choose lives which align with that natural gift that they possess and that passion that burns in their heart to serve others. There's no shame in that whatsoever. By that we mean there is no shame in choosing a life of service. There are many, many individuals, for instance, who work as housekeepers or janitors or butlers or waitresses, waiters, and they enjoy what they do. And you will find that in some very fancy restaurants, they actually can get paid quite well in those positions, because certain clientele expects a certain level of professionalism, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's certainly not true for all restaurants, and waitressing jobs and waiting tables is very often a very low paying job, which is unfortunate considering it can be such gratifying work. It can also be very, very, very difficult, because you're dealing with customers in one of the worst possible situations to deal with customers, and that's when you're serving them food, because you know what people can be like, especially when they get something that they don't like, and they're hungry, and something gets puts on their plate in front of them, and they freak out when it's not to their liking. So being a server in many situations is not easy. For example, being a nurse in a hospital. It can be very gratifying work, but it's back-breaking work. It's very, very difficult, exhausting work. And yeah, if people can be snotty and difficult in a restaurant, imagine how difficult they are in a hospital when they're in pain, when they're suffering, and when they want to be made comfortable. But somehow, individuals who are born to serve, they take the good with the bad. The suffering, the sacrifice that goes along with a life of service, it's part of the job. It comes with the territory. It's like we were speaking last week in grandiose terms, how a bodhisattva is coming to help others and help them metaphysically, psychologically, spiritually. And they're in pain and they're in suffering and they're in hell. But as we discussed last week, a bodhisattva, if they don't know it when they reincarnate and born because of the forgetting, they will be taught through the experience of their life, and they will come to know that we cannot expect, we can give our service with a smile, but we cannot expect it to be received that way. And very often it isn't. And if you have seen, when you have been in hospitals, if you have seen how many people treat their caregivers, their nurses, their doctors, the orderlies, even the people that come to deliver their food, you will know that there they are in the hospital. They might even have life-threatening injuries or a life-threatening illness, and they are treating the people who are trying to help them, trying to cure them, or trying to at least ease their suffering. They have nothing but anger and frustration and vitriol and complaining, and all of their frustration and anger about their illness, and it's like they take it out on the people that are there to help them. And you know this is true. You know this happens. So this is all built into that path of suffering and sacrifice, that path of service. And it applies on all levels, not just on the path of the Bodhisattva. Even individuals who know nothing about that path and have no interest in that path, they just, want to live a normal life, and maybe they're of a particular faith, or maybe they're atheist. It doesn't matter. But they still live a life of service. They're a doctor, they're a nurse, they're perhaps a lawyer, or again, a janitor, a waitress, a waiter, or in some other service industry. We certainly enjoyed our time in the retail industry. All through high school and university, we worked part-time at Kmart, which, if you don't know, Kmart is what we don't even think Kmart, well, certainly Kmart doesn't exist anymore in Canada. We don't know if it still exists in the United States, but it's essentially Walmart, only a little smaller, and not such a huge conglomerate. But essentially, discount department store is the way to describe it, I suppose. But we loved that job because precisely it was a job of service. It was customer service. But there is another level that goes beyond the direct help, the direct service. And that other level comes into play when the suffering that an individual faces reaches a magnitude and is of a particular quality, a particular flavor that somehow catches the imagination of others. It sparks something in the collective consciousness of the present zeitgeist of humanity. And a single individual facing impossible odds and enduring tremendous suffering, often alone, that fact, that experience, when the world becomes aware of it, becomes aware of their struggle, again, it captures their imagination. It speaks to something inside of them. Something awakens inside the collective consciousness of a family, of a community, of a city, of a state, of a nation, even the planet. And in that collective consciousness, individuals rise up and take note, and many of them are inspired to do something, to help in some way, to throw their support in favor of the individual or the small group that is facing this enormous struggle, that is going through this tremendous suffering. And it is that potential to inspire and unite, to rally others to a cause, to rally others to the side of a small group of individuals, or even a single individual, a ragtag outlier, a loner, very often a nobody, an underprivileged, unremarkable, seemingly unqualified individual who has been saddled with this enormous undertaking, this enormous challenge, this heroic struggle, and that captures the imagination of the world. And they rally, they flock, they come to that individual's aid. Or at the very least, moment by moment, day after day after day, they wait with bated breath for news on the progress that individual is making with regards to that struggle, with regards to that challenge. Now, clearly, there are many examples that we can cite. You may already have case studies being conjured up inside your mind. And we want to be able to share some of those today and look at some of the unique characteristics about them. And recognize this is another level that the path of suffering and sacrifice for humanity has the potential to assist and help humanity have a taste, awaken in humanity that spark that comes from the Christ. Because it is that fire, the fire of fires, the light of lights, of the being of beings, which is the fire of suffering and sacrifice for others. Because it burns. The suffering and sacrifice we face out there is a reflection of the burning need in our heart of hearts to love unconditionally, to give without any expectation of a return, to suffer and to sacrifice for the sake of others. It's more than a interest or a hobby or a intellectual, calculation. No, it's a passion. Just like the artist has the passionate need to create, just as the musician has a passionate need to play. Remember way back weeks ago now, we began this whole journey talking about following one's bliss, and we equated it weeks ago with the passion of the Christ. So what we are speaking of today is the Bodhisattva's burning need, passion to suffer and sacrifice for humanity, yes, and the potential of that burning fire within our heart of hearts that comes through us, through our actions, through our suffering and sacrifice for others, for the planet, for all beings. Through the visualization, the presentation of that, how the world sees that, the impression that potentially has on others, the potential for the fire of fires that burns in our heart of hearts to spread like a wildfire and kindle in others the fire of fires within their own heart of hearts, to cause that spark. There's a quote from a film that's coming to our mind, and it's from Gangs of New York, where Leonardo DiCaprio, his character, is speaking to other Irish characters. And he says, there's more and more of us coming off the boats every day. And he says, all you need is just a spark, just one spark. And you ignite the activity, the action. And he says, you don't have a gang, you've got an army. He says, there's so many of us now. We won't have a gang, we will have an army. But you just need that spark, just that one spark for it to catch fire. And we know, sadly, history is borne out many times that the Black Lodge inverts that and uses that to hypnotize, to rally, to manipulate the mob, And certainly you look to Germany prior to the Second World War and how that particular individual, whose name we can't really say on this platform, and you look to the televangelist, you look to the politician, the nationalist leader, and the ability for slogans and all manner of psychological wizardry, which is black magic, to manipulate the mob. And that's a great line from Gladiator, where they're speaking of Commodus, the emperor, and he's Proximo says to Russell Crowe's character, Maximus, Proximo says to Maximus about Commodus, he knows all too well how to manipulate the mob. And that's what the Black Lodge does. But it's as above, so below. That's that power. It's like the Force in Star Wars. It can flow either way. It's the creative force. You can unfortunately inspire people to do evil, just as you can inspire them to do good. You can light a spark in them to cause chaos and damage and destruction and death, or you can light a spark in them to help awaken and realize that potential of their higher self and that longing of their higher self to do what it can do, so that individual can be the best that they can be, their highest expression, which is always one of service of others. It's always giving. It's always bringing what's inside of you and giving it to the world. That's always the highest expression of any being. It's not about what you take. It's not about what you accumulate. It's none of that. So again, this is another level, another layer of the Bodhisattva path, and how the example is not just an intellectual example. It's not just an esoteric example. It's not just an allegory for us to deconstruct and understand, oh, okay, sure, yeah, we too have to take up our cross, and you have to go through our path and suffering and this and that. And, no, it's recognizing the inspiration and the potential to unify and the potential to light a spark and what can evolve out of that, what can balloon out of that, if you will, snowball out of that. We have comments here. Let's get to those before we continue. Oh, before we do that, why don't we share the link as well? And we'll get the link on the screen first. If you feel like you want to make a contribution to today's topic of case studies of this, of acts of heroism, acts of suffering and sacrifice that have inspired others, that have inspired the world, that have raised the collective consciousness, the collective awareness, and the collective action of families, communities, towns, groups, nations, or the planet. By all means, come and participate. The link is on the screen. It's also in the chat. So let's get to our first comment here. Kundalini, lead by example. What more can one do? And yes, this is true. But as you will see, the first example, the first case study that we're going to look at today, it's not exactly what we mean, right? Like we just said, the life of Jesus, it's yes, he leads by example and so on and so forth, but the inspiration and the ability to inspire and unite goes beyond that. And again, we'll get to the details of that as we get into the first case study today. And Kundalini King continues. He says, I've been a fine example of what not to do. Haven't we all? As well as what one can do. And he says, I find you to be a fine example, Attlas. And with that, I will listen. And with that, he also added, it was the Dead Rabbits. That was the gang. Leonardo DiCaprio's gang that his father led in Gangs of New York, the Martin Scorsese film that we were referencing earlier. It's all you need is a spark, just one spark. All right, so let's get to the first case study, because as we go through it, as we go through this first case study, it should become clear that we are not altogether speaking about leading by example. And it'll be self-evident when we get to it. It looks like we have Azazel wanting to join us. Are you there, Azazel?
Yeah, I
am.
Can you hear us?
No, your microphone volume level is really low.
Okay, let's see here.
Anyway, tell you what, why don't we give you a minute to work that out,
Yeah.
and we might as well get into it here. So we're going to be talking about a movie to begin with, but we're not going to be able to show you any clips because, we always run into copyright problems, especially because this particular movie happens to be on Netflix right now, which means if we played any scene from it, we would run into problems. So instead, we've just prepared a slideshow. And the movie we're going to be speaking about is The Martian. And in case you haven't seen this film, it's directed by Ridley Scott. It came out 3 years ago, something like that. And we're going to quickly run through what The Martian is about. We won't give it away if you haven't seen it yet. It's not important for us to talk about the details of what happens to this fellow, but we will be speaking around and the effect of his situation, his suffering has on others. So we begin with the Hermes departing for and the crew of the Hermes departing for their mission to Mars. And we begin on Mars when, unfortunately, very, very soon into the film, there is this horrific, enormous windstorm, sandstorm on the surface, and the crew is required to return to their base, but one of them gets lost in the sandstorm. So they go out looking for him, but they're unable to locate him. That astronaut's name is Watley, and they have no choice but to abandon the search and go back to the base. But the base gets damaged, and the life support and everything is damaged in the storm. So they head back into the airlock, and they really have no choice but to abort the mission. So they leave the surface and they return to the Hermes, and they go on their way back to Earth, having left Watley behind, having left him for dead. But it turns out that he's not dead. And he digs himself out from the sand, and he finds himself completely alone on a desolate planet. And we begin to hear his inner psychological process and dealing with this as he leaves his video diaries and records these video diaries for posterity, but also for NASA, and also, I guess, for his own benefit. Like, why do people keep diaries? Because it's a good thing to get things off of your chest. And he resolves not to die. He says, I'm not going to die here. And he sets himself to work, recovering everything that he can recover, organizing, and since his specialty is that of a botanist, he actually starts growing food for himself. He takes the store of potatoes that they have, and he creates a makeshift greenhouse, and he cuts the potatoes in half, and he plants them, and he fertilizes them, and he figures out a way to create water, and he makes himself busy with the task of surviving on Mars, being the only human being on Mars. And of course, he's tracking his time, his days, right? They call them souls on Mars, SOLS. And the esoteric significance of that shouldn't be lost on anybody. Souls, meaning sons, but it's also soul. Our soul, SOUL, it's not by accident that it sounds exactly the same as SOL in Latin, meaning son. And souls on Mars are days. And it's the red planet. It's also the planet of Master Samael on Mayor. The Archangel Samael is the regent of Mars. That's his planet. But eventually, the gravity of his situation starts to sink in. He's all alone on a desolate planet. And if you put yourself in his shoes, you can appreciate just how alone he really is and just what that means. And in that isolation, he faces this impossible challenge. And this is the image from the thumbnail to today's live stream. He goes through tremendous suffering. And that really is the foundation, the basis, the premise of The Martian. This one man's, it's really, it's Robinson Crusoe on Mars. That's what the story is, right? Man lost on desert island. It's just like Castaway with Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks didn't have a video diary. Tom Hanks had a volleyball, right? Named Wilson. That was his only companion, his only friend, the only thing that he could talk to. Wilson was Tom Hanks's therapist and his diary. Someone, because he anthropomorphized it. He personified this volleyball. And it was someone to talk to, anybody. And of course, we see that in The Martian as well. So Azazel says, Mars, yeah, in reference to Master Samael and being the regent of Mars. Azazel, how's your tech working?
Hopefully fine.
Yeah, well, I still can't hear you.
Damn it.
I wonder if there's a... Okay, so we can see from our end that your mic volume is low, but we can't edit your mic volume. So on your portrait, if you click the three little dots,
Yeah.
you can go to edit mic settings, and then there'll be a slider for mic volume. Just grab that and move it to the right. You guys can hear Azazel? Kundalini says sounds good on our end.
That's weird.
I wonder, is it possible my sound is low? Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Tiffany says that she can't hear you. Maybe Kundalini King was referring to our voice. Did you try adjusting? Did you try adjusting that?
Let's see.
Here, let me. Okay. Oh, you know what? Okay, try now.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, good.
Okay, yeah. Low. Now, how's that, everybody? Say hello to everybody, Azazel.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, I can hear you perfect now.
Good.
So we're gonna assume that others can as well. So, what were we? Oh yes, Tiffany said, "Cheers and good day. Great topic today. Already settled in for it." Okay. And yes, Tiffany says, perfect. Hi, Azazel. Okay, she couldn't hear you before, but she can hear you now, so we fixed the problem. So the story is not new. Being lost on a desert island, all alone, isolated. It's a very, very old story. Man versus nature, actually. It's one of the classical stories. Man versus man, man versus nature, man versus God, man versus himself. And all good stories combine almost all of them, because man versus nature is really already man versus self, and man versus God, because God and nature are one, and God and self are one. But that's an esoteric take. In typical secular, English classes in high school, they're separate. They're different stories. But what makes The Martian different is he manages quite cleverly to establish communications with Earth. And how he does that is really clever and ingenious. In fact, most of the film, not all, but much of the film is, you might say, like, very naturalistic, very realistic. It's a type of science fiction that's mostly science and very little fiction. And this lends strength and credibility to the story because it is set in the near future. It's not in the far future. It's not in a galaxy far, far away. It's set in a realistic depiction of what a Mars mission might actually look like, and how this particular struggle might actually unfold. And so how he establishes communication with Earth is very clever and ingenious, but it's also very slow. But suffice it to say, he is able to establish a connection with Earth, and they can start communicating back and forth. So the aspect of the film which is interesting and relevant to today's topic is Earth's reaction to Whatley being left behind on Mars and being the sole human being, the sole astronaut, all alone on the red planet, left for dead, but turns out he's really alive. And how does humanity respond to that? For us, we watched this film this week with our father, who's a space nut. He loves space, he loves NASA and all these things, but he hates science fiction. And generally speaking, he doesn't like, especially science fiction that involves aliens and laser guns and explosions and, the typical Hollywood garbage when it comes to science fiction. So he never liked the genre. But we watched this movie with him, and he was riveted from beginning to end. And the only reason why he was precisely because it didn't have any of that crazy action and violence and all the other stuff that they usually shove into science fiction. It really was a lot of science and a human story. It was Robinson Crusoe on Mars, but the aspect that really sets this film apart is the Earth's response to one of its sons suffering all alone on a desolate planet, and how the Earth bands together, how everyone at NASA is awoken to do their job to the best of their ability. in order to get Whatley home. And the entire planet bands together in solidarity, in prayer, in support of Whatley, bringing him home, bringing home our lost son. It's the parable from the Bible of the shepherd going out after the lost sheep, the one lost sheep. It's that parable. When you look at it from the Earth's perspective, when you look at it from Whatley's perspective, it's Robinson Crusoe in space, right? It's Jesus in the desert, 40 days and 40 nights. It's the Israelites in the desert, 40 years, wandering in the desert. But if you look at it from the point of view of Earth, it's the parable of the lost sheep and the shepherd who goes out for the lost sheep. Only in this case, it's not one shepherd, it's a planet of individuals who are, none of them work at NASA, but all of a sudden, they all suddenly become NASA employees. They all suddenly become shepherds of this astronaut. And would they have the technology, they would personally go and get him, but they don't. So they have to rally behind the organization NASA, which is responsible for them, and the head of the Mars program and the head of the spaceflight crew. And there's a lot of interpersonal dynamics, right? Office politics and actual politics and media politics, public relations, and all that stuff. But what is most uplifting is the hope and the realistic depiction, the plausibility of it all. That people are rallying in Times Square to watch the NASA updates on the giant screen in Times Square. The world is on the edge of its seat. The world is riveted. They're rallied behind this one individual, this one lost soul, and all of his suffering. And they unite. At some point, there's this catastrophic failure as they're trying to send a resupply vessel to Mars because he's going to run out of food. He's going to run out of water. He's going to run out of, so they tried to get a supply vessel to him, but because they're on such a tight schedule, they're trying to do everything in such a tight schedule, they decide they're going to skip the pre-flight safety protocols in order to make their launch window. And they make their launch window and everything's looking good, but then there's a catastrophic failure. So they have no choice. They have no choice but to pick up the phone. And on the other end of the phone, because they get a call, and they pick up the phone, and on the other end of the phone is the Chinese Space Agency. And here, for the first time in maybe any film we've ever seen, you have real world adversaries in a so-called Cold War between the West and China, between America and China. And here you have a depiction of enemies that are fighting a Cold War come together and say, how can we help? We have a rocket. You can use our rocket to resupply. And there's this beautiful sequence of cooperation between the United States and China. And for us, the power of the Martian, the power of the story, and its true allegory is this lost sheep, the shepherd who goes out into the night, into the storm, to retrieve the lost sheep. But it's not one shepherd, it's the village. It's the planet that unites and goes to get the lost sheep. This is an aspect of inspiring others to our suffering. And you see, it's not quite as Kundalini King suggests at the beginning when he said lead by example. Because Watley is not leading here. He's just trying to survive. He's just doing what needs to be done. As Kundalini King says, he's going to science the shit out of everything, even the potatoes, literally. Kundalini adds that Moon is another great one. We haven't seen Moon. So Watley is just doing what he needs to do. He's on his journey. He's Robinson Crusoe on Mars. And he needs to do what he needs to do for himself. But when the world get winds of it, and when the world is given a window on his journey, a window on his suffering, and they get to peer into and access little snippets of his experience, the struggle that he goes through, the obstacles that he faces, and how alone he is, inspires them and unites them. This is an aspect of the path of the Bodhisattva that goes beyond leading by example, right? Watley doesn't want people to get on a spacecraft and go crash on a planet somewhere and try to survive on their own, right? That's the, and it's not, and it's also not a matter of inspiring everybody to do everything that you can to survive, right? Because that's the example that he's giving. He needs to science the shit out of everything. But that's not what the planet is inspired to do. Not everybody can science the shit out of everything, but everybody can pray. Everybody can lend their support in however they can lend their support, their attention, their care. And everyone can set aside their differences. They can set aside their pettiness. They can rally behind this cause, this struggle, because it's an archetypal human struggle, and everyone can feel into and experience vicariously, experience and participate in Watley's struggle to survive. And in doing so, Watley is not alone anymore. Not by any stretch of the imagination. The whole world is with him. And that, of course, helps him psychologically to some degree. He's not alone anymore. Number one, he has NASA to help him. And the interaction is quite interesting and fascinating. And some of the solutions that NASA comes up with, Watley's not so keen on. But regardless, the rest of the film is all about the how they overcome the challenges together, and how the inspiration and unity inspired by Watley's circumstances brings the best out of everyone on the planet, at least for the period of time that he's there and struggling. And so this is an aspect that is another way, another level that the Bodhisattva can inspire others. Not just by the cold, rational pragmatic, obvious way. Well, of course, they're leading by example. Because let's look at some other case studies. Let's consider some other examples. And again, you're going to see that struggle and sacrifice and suffering can often, not always, but often bring out the very best in people, if only for a short period of time. Because unfortunately, sadly, for this humanity at least, it is very much a fleeting effect. It can have legs, it can stretch into the future, but very often it's like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. The law of entropy takes over, and the resolution of that inspiration begins to degrade over time. And such is the case in Christianity and Catholicism, for instance. But that happens with every religion anyway. But that's, you can see there that the inspiration and unity inspired by Master Abbottamento, Jesus of Nazareth, and his crucifixion and resurrection, you can see that that has had legs for over 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, it has inspired love and unity. Unfortunately, it has also been used as a pretext for a lot of atrocities. But, you know, nothing can be done about that because free will is a law in the universe, and people, the Black Lodge, will manipulate, twist, and corrupt anything that they can get their hands on. And the more powerful it is, the more meaningful it is, the more inspirational it is, the more the Black Lodge wants to get their hand on it and exploit that power, exploit that inspiration, exploit the meaning of it for their own purposes, for their own ends. Tiffany says, it would be refreshing to have our encouragements flipped from devolution to evolution. It would indeed. It would indeed. Oh, we missed the first one, Tiffany, who said, interesting. I was just talking with someone earlier about a reunification of a world and church leaders in a different vein from what you speak of here, but a reunification all the same. You know that there is a conspiracy theory out there that states that we are about to experience a mock alien invasion. An alien invasion which is entirely a CIA operation, which will create a fake alien invasion, and the purpose of it is to unite all the nations of the world and all the peoples of the world against a common enemy in order to usher in the one world government, and for people to become a highly regimented, materialist, mechanical, and aggressive towards this so-called alien invading force, and so that they can bring about all of the surveillance and all of the other things that they want to impose on the human population, that this alien invasion black op, this false flag attack by so-called aliens, will again, quote, inspire and unite humanity. But this, of course, it's a false flag operation. It's using fear to unite humanity, not on the basis of their divine nature, but on the basis of their animal, mechanical nature. fear. But it's the same tactic, it's the same strategy, or it's the same phenomenon. Whereas when the White Lodge does it, it organically, naturally happens because of the inspiration. As we said, the Christ invokes and kindles its essence, its spark within the hearts of humanity. Well, the Black Lodge can't kindle any spark in humanity, but what can they do? They can manipulate and condition the spark in humanity and exploit it and channel it, funnel it, filter it through its mechanical nature. And fear is one such filter. And we all experienced this just a few years ago with that common cold that was invented in China and spread throughout the world. Tiffany Milarba says, "Yeah, not the reunification I refer to. This story you just told, alien invasion, sounds horrific." No, no, fair enough, fair enough. But any, we just brought that into the case that there is unification on the positive side. There's on the divine side. There's unification of spirit, and then there's unification of ego, and that very often you will find both are taking place, and that fear and love are the two aspects that are being put into activity in order to unite in the same way that the Black Lodge likes to divide and conquer. And they do that by uniting individuals on two sides to fear one another. That's divide and conquer. Or they can take two different people who right now fear one another and have no relations with one another. And then you can use a third threat to then unite these two against the other one. And you've created a false enemy, right? A false flag to unite domestic enemies against a foreign power, for instance. That's how the United States stays together, by the way. Because the United States, the federal government, has very weak powers over the individual states. The federal government's real power is in the defense of the nation against other nations. That's why America always has to be at war with someone or in a cold war with someone. That's the only way the United States can stay united. Because otherwise the states are like, what, what's the point? All the state laws are different, state to state to state to state. Kundalini King says, I was wondering what the CIA was going to do with all their fentanyl trafficking money, alien invasion. Like we said, that's a conspiracy theory. Whether or not it's going to materialize is another question, because there are different possibilities of how things are going to play out. It's unclear and it's uncertain whether or not that scenario is actually going to play out, but it exists, and it's a conspiracy theory, but there's truth behind it. It's not wholly an invention of people's minds, but it is a distraction for many people. They do get sidelined by it. So let's talk about another. Well, first of all, we have a guest who decided to join us. Azazel, do you have anything to add to what we've to how far we've come so far?
Well, I do have nothing to add basically, other than to confirm that there is truth to these conspiracy theories, but it goes as deep enough that people would have to meditate upon it. So they would have to meditate upon it for themselves to actually comprehend what's going on.
So without getting too deep into it or too far on a tangent, if you've ever heard stories of alien abduction,
Yeah.
you are hearing stories that relate to this project, this false flag operation that they have been preparing for decades. Ever since the crash at Roswell and the recovery of alien technology. They've studied the alien technology and they've been trying to replicate the alien technology, and many of the objects now are of American creation. But the alien abduction stuff, they have been using that to carefully plant and create this entire community in the UFO world, this community that is convinced that an alien invasion is imminent because they've been abducting humans and experimenting on them and finding out their weaknesses. In fact, that's a line from the movie Independence Day.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, all of that stuff is false flag related. All of that alien invasion stuff going all the way back to War of the Worlds, which actually caused a real panic. It was a radio drama, and it actually caused a real panic in the world. People thought that they were actually being invaded by aliens, and probably when the people in power saw that, and they said, wow, that could come in handy someday.
Yeah.
And that's probably when they started planning that. And as technology progressed and as things happened, they just added more and more and more capability and more tricks in their bag of tricks.
Yeah, so it's like this war against the true self versus the false self all the time.
Yeah, because that's another way too to keep people distracted. Well, that's what we were saying what we wrote in our book, how conspiracy theory and how planted conspiracy theory, like disinformation campaigns and specifically planted stories and leaks from the government itself, keep people distracted and keep people chasing white rabbits down different holes instead of looking within themselves.
Indeed.
Right? So, but let's talk about another case study. Like, let's get off of the really big stuff, right? And turn it back. Let's turn back the clock to my childhood / teenage years, when there was a famine in Ethiopia, and it was a terrible drought, terrible famine, and many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people died, and millions were affected, countless millions, and children and were going hungry. And, well, I mean, a famine, a proper famine. And at that time, something happened where it began with Bob Geldof in the United Kingdom. He decided that he was going to do something about it because Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were in the Oval Office and at 10 Downing Street, respectively, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And at that time, economists coined a term. They called it Reaganomics and Thatcherism, these two terms, and how for a solid 8 years, some say closer to 12, but a solid 8 years or 2 terms, these two approaches, these two sets of policies, Reaganomics in the United States and Thatcherism in the UK, defined the global economy for those 8 years, basically for the 80s, for the 1980s, for that decade, was defined by Reaganomics and Thatcherism. And you may know that neither of those individuals are remembered for their tremendous compassion. They were not known for their giving spirit. They were both staunch conservatives and staunch supporters of so-called free market capitalism. Or at least they were publicly anyway. So this was a tremendous thorn in the side of liberal-minded individuals, and Bob Geldof was one of them. And he decided that he was going to rally the collective voice of artists. He was going to inspire and unite artists, and he was going to do so by showing them, educating them about the famine in Africa. And he wrote a song, and he got all of the artists in the UK, or at least the prominent ones, the popular ones at the time, to come together to record the song and make a video. And the video was called "Do They Know It's Christmas?" And all the proceeds from the sale of that single would go to Africa to help ease the suffering of the individuals because of the famine. And of course, Tiffany chimes in here and she says, "We are the world." And yes, naturally, Quincy Jones and Lionel Richie recognized that, in fact, Lionel Richie and we just saw a documentary on this not long ago, frankly. There's a documentary on Netflix about the making of the "We Are the World" single. It was Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, and Michael Jackson. These were the 4 key individuals. We hope we're getting that right. We hope we didn't miss anybody. But who said they were all okay. Now you realize that Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, and Michael Jackson are all African Americans. And when they heard "Do They Know It's Christmas?" and they realized what the hell was going on, they said to themselves, a bunch of white folk in England have recorded a single to help the African famine, and we haven't done anything. And we're African Americans, and we haven't done anything. So immediately they set themselves to task. And they immediately, and in very short order, they pulled together all of the artists. They wrote the song, they wrote the lyrics, and they pulled everybody together. Quincy Jones, of course, produced the single, and Tiffany is right. "We Are the World," USA for Africa, was the result. And of course, the video on that and everything. It's a wonderful documentary, by the way. We can't remember the title of the documentary, but surely if you go on Netflix and search "We Are the World" documentary, you're going to find it. And it's one of those songs where you cannot bring together that kind of talent. Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, and Michael Jackson, and all of them contributed musically and lyrically to that song. You cannot bring together that talent, that kind of talent, and not produce something very special. And then when you bring the other talent, the performing talent, to sing the work of those 4 superstars of music, 4 incredibly talented musicians. And then you bring all those other musicians to bear and put that together. The result is something that is truly magical, and it was magical, and it was powerful, and it raised a lot of money and everything else. But how and why? Because the suffering of those people in Africa, those Ethiopians, that their suffering inspired and united. And it didn't end there. The singles were fine, they were great, and they got lots of play on the radio, and they sold lots of albums, and they raised a lot of money. But that was only the beginning, because Bob Geldof decided, we're gonna take this a step further. We're gonna do something that has never been done before and has never been replicated since. He says, we are going to put on a concert that is going to be simulcast to the 4 corners of the globe on live television, and we're going to play it in stadiums all over the world, live and on television. That concert was called Live Aid. And again, it was to raise money for the orphan children and all those suffering from the famines and all the suffering in Africa. And to this day, you can watch Live Aid and clips from Live Aid on YouTube. Now, we get emotional about this, not least because we grew up with this. This was the time, the era that I grew up, and the tremendous hope that all of this inspired in all of us in my generation. Everyone who got to see this live as a teenager, as a you know w- you know maybe the world is not all that shitty. Maybe the world is not just greed and materialism and selfishness. And Kundalini King says what we were going to, but we thought, well, we'll leave it for someone else to bring up. Queen is, or certainly was, one of my favorite bands. As you can imagine, if you've watched Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie with, the actor's name just slipped my mind. Uh, anyway, if you've seen the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, if you've seen any of the documentaries, you know that much of Queen's music, because of all the band members, shared the same characteristic. They were all outliers. They were all outsiders. Queen's music is a music for independent spirits, people who don't quite fit in anywhere. And they were a band which got me through many a difficult time in my youth, and especially during my high school years and university years. And Freddie Mercury and Queen opened Live Aid. They were the first band to play. And if you have seen that footage, oh yes, thank you, Kundalini King. It's Rami Malek who played Freddie Mercury in the film Bohemian Rhapsody, and he won. I know he won the Golden Globe. Did he also win the Oscar? I can't remember. I don't think so. But in any case, If you've seen that footage, if you've seen that performance, that is considered by many to be the greatest concert set of all time, certainly in pop music. And even Bob Geldof, uh, he credited Freddie Mercury and Queen for electrifying and kickstarting the whole Live Aid concert because of that performance, because of the way that Freddie Mercury could work a crowd and inspire a crowd and get the crowd participated in the performance and feel like they really are part of the goings on. And again, we can reiterate, it's something that has never been replicated. Sure, there have been World Cups and many Olympics and all kinds of other stuff, but for some reason, there's never been a repeat of Live Aid. Maybe because Bob Geldof is too old, or nobody's taken up the mantle, or because his humanity is degenerating, is devolving. And that this humanity might have peaked sometime in the 80s when bands like U2 were singing about love, and their song One was an anthem for young people around the world to have hope that perhaps we might one day realize a world where we are all one. But that world never materialized, of course, and it will never materialize. And any type of unity that they try to impose on us is not going to be the unity that we all longed for in our hearts, and that the new age still delusionally believes is just waiting around the corner, that some mass global awakening is just waiting to suddenly, spontaneously overtake this humanity and achieve 5D ascension and all that new age propaganda nonsense. But nonetheless, the fact remains that everything that we just described over the last half an hour, all those musicians lending their talents and their time and their energy, and then inspiring the world again, likewise. And it was all inspired, that inspiration and unification was all born out of the terrible suffering of people in Ethiopia at the time, suffering of people in Africa at the time. There are countless cases. If you are familiar with the musical Come From Away? Someone made a musical, and the musical was, we're going to get you the title. Come From Away? Is it Come From Away? Yeah, it's Come From Away. We just weren't 100% sure on the title. Okay. So it's Come From Away. And this was a musical based on the real story of, after 9/11, while 9/11 was happening and the towers were being struck and so on and so forth, the US Aviation Authority grounded all the planes in the air and refused to allow any international flights from landing in New York for obvious reasons. And in fact, it was refusing international flights from entering US airspace. So there was all these flights in the air, particularly from Europe, which weren't allowed to land. And because of the way they do their flight plan, a lot of them fly over the North Atlantic. It just turns out that Gander Airport in Newfoundland can accommodate international flights, because many international flights, there's a stopover in Newfoundland for smaller planes and whatnot and so forth. Newfoundland has been a essential hub for North American and European traffic ever since the early days of international flight between Pan Am and transatlantic airlines. So what happened was all these flights from overseas were diverted to Gander, Newfoundland, and all the passengers had to be put up. But Gander, Newfoundland doesn't have that many hotels. So the mayor of Gander and the premier of Newfoundland appealed to the people of Gander, Newfoundland, and the people of Newfoundland. Would they be willing to open their doors? Did they have a spare bedroom to take a passenger from one of these planes and hold them up for who knows how long, because all the flights were grounded after 9/11 for, what was it, a week? And essentially you had an entire province, certainly the entire city, and then the surrounding area, Newfoundland, these people opening their doors to total strangers. And as the story goes, in that time of terrible confusion and terrible uncertainty and tragedy, friendships were formed, bonds were formed between total strangers that would last a lifetime. And it is that story that was immortalized in this musical, Come From Away. We saw this musical in Toronto, and it's a tear-jerking story. We are moved to tears every time we think about it and talk about it, because again, it's another example of terrible tragedy, of terrible suffering, inspiring and uniting humanity. In this case, the citizens of Gander and the citizens of Newfoundland and their foreign guests, many of whom didn't speak English or just barely spoke English. And let's face it, Newfoundlanders, at times, Newfoundlanders are even difficult to understand by English standards. The rest of Canada sometimes have difficulty understanding Newfoundlanders. So, because they have a very strong accent, they have a very strong Newfoundland dialect, and they have their own vocabulary. Newfoundland is a very interesting culture within Canada. It's a unique and distinct place, but it's a maritime land, newfound land, and a maritime land, a land that is populated by fishermen. These are people who have their entire life have been rallying and uniting, inspired by the savagery of the ocean and by the terrible, difficult life of the commercial fisherman or the offshore oil rig worker. They have been experiencing that story of man versus nature. They live that. They've been living that for hundreds of years. Generations and generations and generations of families who, yeah, when tragedy strikes, when hurricanes strike, and half the town is wiped out, the other half opens their doors and they open their hearts. And they band together and they say, how can I help? What can I do? And when they look out their window and they see what their neighbor is doing, they feel ashamed to say, why am I not doing that? What am I doing? And they immediately join in. Because that's what true human beings do when they see someone in need, when they see someone suffering, when they see a tragedy unfolding.
Yeah, or when they see something out of order.
This story, the lost sheep, this parable from the Bible, the lost sheep. Newfoundlanders, that's their life. Every fisherman will tell you that they've gone out onto the ocean in the middle of a hurricane or a storm looking for a boat that hadn't come in yet. Or going to evacuate oil rig workers because of a hurricane that was coming, and they had to evacuate the workers from the oil rig. And all sorts of these, when you live in a maritime community like that, yes, the sea filled with its bounty, it's the source of your livelihood, it's the source of your wealth, because Newfoundland is a very wealthy province, or it should be anyway, by virtue of the oil that's offshore. Sometimes the trickle-down economics don't work properly in that province, probably because of all the corruption and everything else from the oil companies. And well, let's not get into that. But the point is that Newfoundland is very rich in spirit. And those people are hardy and strong and resilient and fearless. Fearless. Because you have to be living on the shores of the North Atlantic, as Newfoundland is, a rock, an island, just like, the UK or Scotland, Ireland. You have to, when you're dealing with those elements, and on that latitude, that far north, so the adversity, the struggle, the suffering brings out the best in such communities,
Yeah.
collectively and individually. And so the opportunity for a bodhisattva to come here and do their work for humanity, it's almost too important. It's too good. The possibility, the potential is too valuable to squander, to not take advantage of. Which is why so many bodhisattva end up suffering so publicly. And many of them are martyred publicly, like so many of the saints. And it ends up being a big show of their suffering and their death, because it ends up immortalizing them in the culture and the minds and the hearts of the planet, certainly of the community and of the nation, and layers and layers and levels out. And how they faced their end, how they faced that suffering and how they face that persecution, how they face their struggle, inspires humanity to, in that sense, follow their example, follow their lead. And then in another sense, rally to their side, rally to their aid, rally to their cause. Magabu has a number of comments here. We should get to them before we get too behind. He says, even if technologically we have advanced a lot, morally the degeneration is quite obvious. And he says, compared to the 90s, we live in a darker world, just my opinion. And he says, then again, I was a child back then. And finally, he says, maybe, probably, I have become darker than when I was a child. Certainly, the 90s was a time in the West. Certainly, we can look musically. The 90s was a time when the hopefulness of the 80s, for example, when Reagan said those immortal words on the western side of the Berlin Wall, and he gave a speech there, and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down. And a few short years later, the wall did come down. The wall that divided Eastern and Western Germany, and Germany was reunited. This represented such a ray of hope. It was such a cathartic moment of healing where you can go back and watch the footage of families, German families, who had been separated for 50 years by this wall. These families that half of them were in East Germany and half of them were in West Germany, and they finally got to be together again, but also complete strangers from either side of the wall. And when the wall comes down, they're just hugging each other and kissing each other as if they've been, again, a family reunited. And the whole world saw this. And my brother actually was in Germany when these events took place, and Pink Floyd did a concert, did The Wall. And they did The Wall in front of the wall as the wall was coming down. My brother was at that concert. This represented such hope. It was a symbol of hope, a symbol of possibility, and why so much of the New Age was convinced that the Great Awakening is coming, that humanity is going to overcome its differences, that compassion and love are going to tear down the walls between us. Here it was in real concrete, coming down, crumbling before our eyes. These lines of division, these lines of hatred, of fear, of suspicion, they can be erased. So it was a great time of hope and inspiration and a positive outlook, and this whole positivity movement and the power of positivity and self-help and all of this stuff was all bubbling and coming into being and everything else. And then us children of the 70s and 80s, our Gen X, we got into the 90s, we got into university and into the real world. And all of our hopes and dreams were suddenly dashed. All of our hopes and dreams of our youth, that's what came crashing down. That's what ended up crumbling all around us as the stark reality of the situation hit us. And this is what got reflected in the West Coast grunge movement, which became one of the most popular musical genres of the 1990s. That and the hip hop, rap, gangster rap musical genre, which was born from the inner cities in the United States, born of the gang violence, born of the drug use, born of the broken households and the single mothers raising 2, 3, 4 kids and trying to make a go of it in the world. So you had these simultaneously, these two different musical genres, musical movements going in very different directions, but reflecting the same angst and the crushed spirit, the cynicism and the negativity and the lost hope of a generation who began their life and went through their youth seeing these symbols of hope and seeing the world come together for USA for Africa and for Live Aid, and then we saw the Berlin Wall coming down and all of these hopeful signs. But then the 90s came, and what was one of the first things that happened with George Bush Sr., right? The war in Iraq, the Gulf War. And all of a sudden, new walls were going up, new lines in the sand were being drawn, new conflicts, new this. And then there was that, if we recall correctly, there was a terrible recession that hit also in the 90s. And so economically, and all sorts of stuff that we were experiencing in our young adulthood. Well, first through university and then into our young adulthood. And I personally went through my struggles as a young adult and career and everything else. I had to basically escape, run away. I went to Japan. That's where my journey had to take me anyway. But we got off on a little bit of a tangent there. We talking about being comparing to the 90s and compared to the 80s, and then in the 2000s, well, the defining event of the millennium was first the .bomb crash, because the internet was the great new hope, right? At the end of the 90s, it was the birth of the internet and this new international, completely free publishing platform for text and voice and music and video and images. And now anybody could communicate with anybody around the world, and all of these communities were coming together, and they were even playing games together. The MMORPG was invented, and the first really popular one was Ultima Online, which was a spiritual successor of one of the greatest role-playing games in history, the Ultima series that we write about in our book, that was filled with what was all about the avatar and the 8 great virtues. It was one of the most powerful esoteric philosophies ever to apply to a video game. And the first massively multiplayer online video game was based on it, was based on that video game series. One of the most spiritual, divinely inspired games ever was the foundation of the world's first MMORPG. And to this day, Ultima Online exists in small pockets of communities and on servers around the world because people love it that much. They love the universe of Ultima that much and the community and everything around it, because everybody lived and played by those virtues. And it was a beautiful vision of a virtual world, again, based on the hopefulness of the 80s, based on that outlook that that good will prevail, that virtue will prevail over evil, over tyranny. But then the dot bomb bubble burst, and all those a whole lot of internet companies crashed, along with the internet company that I was involved with at the time. And then shortly after that, we had the angst and anxiety around the Y2K bug, which of course that was all a manufactured frenzy, but caused a great deal of anxiety and a great deal of stress. And then right after that, 9/11 happened and the war on terror. So it's been this precipitous cascade of one thing after another, after another, after another, that's been going downhill since the peak in the 1980s, in the late 1980s. It's been just going downhill ever since. We're due really for some more inspiration. We're due really for some more unification. Humanity is. And it may be that it's going to take somebody walking the path of the Bodhisattva to do it. And it may be that the individual who manages to inspire and unite humanity, if even for a short time, is going to have to do so through a great deal of suffering and sacrifice and struggle. Or it may be that this Bodhisattva, this person walking the path of the Bodhisattva, is going to contextualize and unveil and reveal the great struggle, the great suffering, and the great sacrifice that all of humanity is facing, but is ignorant to. And maybe in the revelation of that, in the apocalyptic unfolding of the truth, maybe humanity, or at least pockets of humanity, or at least those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, those who can get past their cognitive dissonance, past their conditioned beliefs, will be able to find the inspiration and find the community to unite with, the like-minded, like-spirited individuals who likewise have had that spark, that essence kindled within them because of the fire and the passion of the Bodhisattva that is here to cause the spark, right? Just one spark, just one individual who becomes an embodiment of the suffering, of the struggle, of the human condition that all of humanity can identify with, or at least all of humanity will have sons and daughters who can recognize and identify, those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, will be ignited, will be lit, and they will feel the essence of that fire burning in their hearts. And they will be inspired to unite, inspired by the suffering, the struggle, the sacrifice. And not just, they're not just that they're following an example. This Bodhisattva isn't going to be doing what he's doing because he expects everybody to do exactly what he's doing, how he's doing it. No, 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 no. No. It's just the case that beautiful things, wonderful things, acts of kindness, these are all wonderful and beautiful, and they certainly speak to those who admire and welcome and cherish beauty and truth and light. But it's just a fact that what so often really motivates people, as Kundalini King points out here, for most people, it's not so much that you're lighting the spark in their heart, but more like lighting a fire under their ass. We would argue, Kundalini King, that lighting the fire under their ass is how the Black Lodge does it. That's the fear and the urgency that they instill in the population that lights the fire under their ass. Now, the Bodhisattva lights the fire in their heart. Suffering and sacrifice and struggle lights the fire in your heart, which then can be followed up by getting your ass in gear, lighting the fire in your ass to actually do something about it. But that's the actual physical motivation beyond feeling the compassion or the empathy to actually transform that compassion and empathy into practical action, into lending your voice, your resources, your talent, your energy, your finances, whatever it is that you have to give. Do whatever your small part is. That's the lighting the fire under your ass. But you can do that yourself. If you feel that fire in your heart, you will find a way to allow that to move you, right? You don't want to have the fire under your ass without the fire in your heart, because then you're just acting on fear, and you're acting on self-preservation, or you're acting on pride, or on any number of egos. We want our heart the driver of our actions, because in the heart is the Adam nous of our being. And when the Bodhisattva inspires with the fire of their passion, that is their bliss, that is embodied in the suffering and sacrifice and the struggle that they're making very public for the very reasons that we've been exposing today, Bodhisattva don't do this to show off. They don't do this because they want to be famous. As we pointed out last week, Master Abbottamento is not famous. Nobody knows who Master Abbottamento is. The AI that transcribes these for us so that we can have subtitles on the recordings of these live streams, the AI has no idea how to interpret when we say Master Abbottamento. We get everything. We got that AI trying to guess at everything. Master Abelomento? They doesn't know what, so nobody knows who Master Abbottamento is. Everybody calls him Jesus Christ. That's not his name. Christ is not a name. Jesus is not a name. Yeshua means like master, savior, anointed one. And Christ is the Christ. It's the logos. It's the multiple unity, but nobody is named Christ. You can't go into the supernal worlds and ask for Christ. They'll say, you'll have to be more specific than that. So Master Abbottamento is completely anonymous. Think about that. Master Abbottamento did not go through the crucifixion his entire ministry to be famous. He's not. And he's not even infamous. He's forgotten. He was never truly known. By your works will ye be known. Now, of course, when people pray to Jesus Christ, of course, Master Abbottamento hears those prayers. Of course. But you see, he was never in it for the self-satisfaction of being worshipped. This is what so many of the atheists get wrong in their critiques of religion. and their oh so clever rationalization for how, well, if God is so great, why does he need humanity to worship him? Well, guess what? This humanity doesn't worship the absolute and doesn't worship God by his real name. We don't. Just as we don't worship Jesus by his real name. And it's God is not a tyrant, and God does not want groupies. He doesn't want fans. Fan is short for fanatic. God doesn't want fanatics. Fanatics are what the ego makes of religion. Benjamin says they should remake Ultima. That would be so cool. Many people have. Many people have remade from the classical era of Ultima. Ultima's 4, 5, and 6. There have been fan-made remakes. What happened was, in the 90s and 2000s, other role-playing games came out that included construction kits for the game engine that would allow you to make your own games using their game engine. And there are individuals who got together and decided that they were going to remake Ultima 4 or Ultima 5 or what have you in these new 3D game engines, and they did so. And they're free to download. They're modifications or additions, and you can get them on Steam. You can get them on the internet. You can learn about them. We write about them in our book. So there have not been any original or official remakes of Ultima, because Origin Systems basically was bought out by EA, and EA controls the rights to Ultima, and they completely squandered the property. So that's why we're not going to get an official remake unless some radical change happens at Electronic Arts, and that's probably not going to happen. Kundalini King says humanity as an attainment. To be a human being is an attainment, but humanity, we use the term humanity to describe all of humanity, including the intellectual animals and the true human being. So humanity is a practical term we use, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's human. If not in your heart, then be a fire under your ass. Yeah, we covered that one. And Benjamin Ochoa says, the Christ is just the great aeon. The Christ is all of the aeons. So the Christ is not one anything. The Christ is the perfect multiple unity. It's the second logos. It's the emanation from the absolute. So the whole of the universe has a spark and essence of the Christ within. But it's just a seed. It's just an essence. It's just a spark. It must be developed. But in terms of the demiurge and all of the archangels, all the aeons are all part of the Christ. And Benjamin says, it's what the Gnostic Scythians believe, at least. Well, if they want to call it the great aeon, then that's fine. We're not going to argue. We don't even know who these Scythians are, so they're entitled to however they want to understand or label. It's just a label. It doesn't change the nature of the logos. We could continue with more case studies or more examples of what we were talking about today. Or we could also reflect on some of the developments that have been happening on our end but it might be a little bit premature to reveal any of that yet. So we'll withhold that. But some of what was revealed today, esoterically, may relate directly to what will be unfolding exoterically in the near future. But suffice it to say that in many ways, the soul of humanity is in a fight for its life. It's in a fight for its existence, as it has been for millennia. We call it the eternal conflict between good and evil for the souls of humanity. But the development of AI and degenerative AI, or what they call generative AI, the AI like large language models, the AI that produces images, and the AI that produces text, things like ChatGPT, things like Midjourney, and now it's branching out into video as well. AI is gunning for humanity's creatives. The AI tech bros, the people behind this technology and the people using this technology, are at the moment using it to create completely derivative works based on actual human creations, actual human creative capital. And in the process, they're producing derivative works devoid of any genuine artistic merit and devoid of soul, devoid of spirit, while the human creators are languishing. They're watching as their livelihoods dry up, and they're watching as their creations, their creative capital, their output basically gets exploited without any compensation, without any recompense whatsoever. And it is, in many ways, as we describe in our book as well, like it's the end game of the Black Lodge, right? To essentially replace human beings with what they believe are sentient AI, or that's their goal, is to create sentient AI. And we have begun working with a group to raise more awareness around this issue, the ethical, the social, the economic, and the metaphysical consequences of generative AI, which we call degenerative AI. And we don't call it that ironically either, because that's what it is. AI art is derivative and it's revisionist. So as we get closer to the actual launching of the campaign, then we'll be sharing more information with you about it. But the relevance of today's talk to that pursuit is this notion that the struggle for the soul of humanity is reaching its climax. And yes, this campaign is conceived and directed for the benefit of those suffering the most, the artists themselves, as they are seeing their livelihood and their futures and their very lives drying up before their eyes. Our approach with it is, based on today's talk, is the suffering of artists and the suffering of those who appreciate fine art, high art, truly creative, truly genuine works of inspired imagination and universal truth and universal meaning. Those who appreciate being moved by their music, by their films, by their images, by their stories, by their poetry. That's not everyone. The vast majority of so-called consumers just consume their media. They consume content. But there is a subset of the population that doesn't just consume content. They're starving right now because the streaming platforms and the corporatization of media is mostly about churning out content, just churning it out. And we talked about this last week, and we put out a short video about it, that when generative AI is applied to that corporate model, the corporations are rubbing their hands together. They can't wait to get their hands on this technology. They can't wait for the technology to progress to a point where its output is acceptable enough to put on streaming platforms, to put on television, to put on music services, and to put in movie theaters. But when that happens, the human spirit will be completely eradicated and wiped from culture, from today's modern culture. All of media will have been completely sanitized and completely bleached and utterly devoid of the human spirit, which is the Black Lodge's goal and end game and purpose. The suffering that will bring, or the prospect of such an eventuality, and the struggle against such an eventuality becoming reality, may be enough to unite, to inspire and unite enough individuals who are even marginally awake enough to know that the garbage that Disney has been pumping out is just that, garbage. It's utterly devoid of truth and beauty, not like what Disney used to make even just a decade ago when they made Moana, or before that, or a decade before that when they made The Lion King, and decades before that when they made Sleeping Beauty and Pinocchio. Now what they're pumping out is it's just content. So we are involved in an undertaking which may evolve as time goes on into a much more significant activity of revelation, of education, and of inspiration and motivation. And it will be all around the struggle of the human spirit to remain relevant, to remain dominant over the lives of humanity. which is what it should be, how it's supposed to be. The human spirit is what's supposed to be guiding humanity and guiding humanity's actions and direction, because that human spirit comes from the Logos, the Christ, the divine spirit, the great spirit, the Native Americans call it, and indigenous peoples around the world refer to it as the great spirit. Because the human spirit is a spark, is an aspect, but it's like the tip of a root that connects back into the trunk of the tree. Well, the trunk of the tree and all of its branches and all of its fruit and all of its roots represents the great spirit, the great tree of life, Yggdrasil. And we are just one little capillary of one little root system off of one little root. And yet, it is the tree that should drive and motivate what the little capillary of the root does. And this humanity is in a fight for its life. The human spirit, the conflict, the eternal conflict for the soul of humanity, as we said, is reaching its climax. We are in the end game. We are in the end days. The Kali Yuga is it's going to be coming to a head this decade and the next and the next. So in that struggle, there will be much suffering, much sacrifice. Can we harness that suffering and sacrifice and struggle as a focal point to inspire and unite others? Can we take a lesson and learn from the example of all of the Bodhisattvas, of the Christ itself, of the spark of unconditional love, and all of the ways in which it manifests and expresses itself, including USA for Africa, including the people of Nova Scotia, or the people of Newfoundland, and everyone who stands up to be counted and asks, what can I do? What will I do? When they see suffering and injustice and sacrifice and struggle. And they're inspired to get up and unite others in order to make a difference. We have quite a few new comments here. Figa Deal says, I have multiple pain issues, gets worse daily, will eventually put me in a wheelchair. I've been hanging on for my mom and brother. Had they not been around, I'd have checked out long ago. Unconditional love eventually ends. I entered the chat late. However, an artist's work is dictated on those that market and push it. He says younger generations don't consume music and film like it once was. A vinyl record forced you to sit and listen. Today, it's create 10 works and hopefully one is successful. And Azazel says, I had to leave as we were becoming too tired to contribute. Well, it's late for Azazel, right? He's, I think, 7 hours ahead. On this note, Figa, he says, an artist's work is dictated on those that market and push it. To a degree, that's true, but we're not necessarily speaking about just commercial artists in that sense of the word. There's also many artists and designers, and the better word is creatives, people who work in the creative industry. And their livelihoods are under threat, under attack by generative, we don't know why we can't say that clearly anymore, generative AI. And the corporations, who you referred to here as the those that market and push it. Yes, there are dealers, there are art dealers, there are agents, there are all kinds of machinations involved there. But in terms of music and video games and film, the corporations have taken all that over. And the corporations cannot wait to get their hands on generative AI and be able to churn out content at a pace unimaginable before, because they had to rely on those pesky things called human beings for their creative work. And you know that human beings, because of the nature of creative work, it takes time to do good work. And corporations, they don't like things taking time. Corporations don't like to take their time churning out their product. So, does anyone have any comments or questions or anything to contribute in terms of more case studies, more examples, be it from film, be it from their life, be it from anything related to the topic today of suffering and sacrifice, inspiring others and mobilizing others and uniting others, because there's a million of them, right? We can talk about Nelson Mandela, right? We could talk about, yeah, to a degree, we can talk about Gandhi. But surely, maybe in your own life, your own suffering and sacrifice, maybe you pulled family members together. Maybe you pulled friends together because of what you were going through. Maybe you were going through an illness and all your family and friends pulled together and rallied behind you to help you get through it, to help you get over it. There's a million different examples. It happens all the time. Tiffany says, leaves me wondering how far we actually have to fall at this time. Do we ever get tired of falling? At what point do we feel we've experienced this enough? Low vibration. So if you're referring to humanity, when you ask that question, how often do we have to fall? This humanity is already fallen, and it's in the downward spiral. It's devolving. But in the AUM of Life, that's a spiral, right? So it's a downward spiral like this. We have to go through the regular cycles of life and death, though, as a humanity. So what we're experiencing now is not just the devolution of humanity, it has the added insult to injury of a rapid devolution, because we are at our end of life. As a humanity, this humanity has reached the end of its useful, practical existence. So in old age, right, we become more frail, we become diseased, we become weak, and we get more aches and pains, and we slow down. And, well, surely we don't have to describe old age to you. You have plenty of people around you in your life who have gotten old and passed away even. And you know that that's not a pretty, it's not a pretty picture. Sometimes it can be a very beautiful thing. People who age gracefully and they remain young at heart and they remain grateful and joyful and blissful even as they face their imminent death, their imminent demise. And absolutely, this is what our book is about. And absolutely, when we talk about inspiring and uniting people, this is absolutely why we're here. And the real suffering and struggle that we're here to leverage and inspire and unite humanity with is the great awakening and its and destruction, it's death. And the vast majority of people will not accept that truth. They will not want to hear it. They will be in denial up until the very end. And they will fight tooth and nail. They will light a fire under their ass, as Kundalini King stated earlier, to resist everything that we're trying to do and that we're trying to reveal and that we're trying to use to inspire and unite. So that's why we have a number of different aspects of the Great Awakening that we can use, that we can rely on, that does have groups of people suffering because of and struggling against. And in each one of those, because they are about the Great Awakening, each one attacks an aspect of the human spirit. We are here to inspire. Inspire means in spirit. And unite is union. Yug in Sanskrit, relegare in Latin. Those are the root words of yoga and religion. So to inspire and unite means to help somebody be and act in spirit and in union, not just with one another, but in union with that spirit. To be inspired, to allow the spirit to be in your actions, but then the second part is to be in union with that spirit, in union with the higher self, with your innermost Atman, with the essence. In a way, they're synonymous, but in a way, they're not. There's a subtle difference, but the two of them together, inspired and united, completes a comprehensive picture. And it is through struggle, it is because of suffering that those who have the kindling in their heart, they have the potential for a spark to ignite the flame of the Holy Spirit inside of them. And if they have enough courage and no fear to become one with it, to unite with it, and begin living as an embodiment of that flame, united with that, and united in spirit with other kindred spirits, with others who have been ignited, others who are lit. And we, in our union with our own spirit, allowing that flame, that passion to take hold of us and our life, defining our bliss, at least for this moment, and then spreading and joining with others to create a bonfire. A bonfire as the world hasn't seen since the days of Live Aid. But now we have the internet to reach so many more and to connect with so many more kindred spirits all over the world. And Tiffany says, "Oh, really loving your book so far. I've been wanting to tell you so." Well, we're glad. We appreciate that. And we hope you get a lot from it. Let's put it that way. Does anyone have any other comments or questions or any other concerns or anything to share? Tiffany adds, so through our own sovereignty and encouraging others to embrace theirs, ours, is basically all we got at this point when it comes to worldly collective undertakings? Not exactly. Not exactly. Not exactly. As we just described, well, look, we've said it before, and we'll say it again. We certainly say it in the book. We're an ark builder. We build arcs. That's what we do. In the Bible, our counterpart was called Noah. In the Lemurian epoch, the end of the Lemurian epoch, and the beginning, the birth of the Atlantean epoch, the individual, the persona, or the individual who played the part of Noah was called Attlas. He was the first king, the first ruler of Atlantis. He ruled during the Golden Age. He established the Golden Age of Atlantis. One who establishes a Golden Age for humanity, the one who does so only by virtue of the fact that they were the ones who built the ark for the previous humanity. Not everyone, only those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Only those who were inspired and united by the struggle and the suffering that all of humanity faced, just as any individual person faces when they face their own death, when they're lying on their deathbed. Are you familiar with the last rites? You know the sacrament of the last rites? For a Catholic, when they're on their deathbed, they can request that a priest come and administer the last rites. This is a ritual, a practice and a ritual of the Catholic Church that supposedly prepares that individual and that individual's soul for death, prepares them to enter heaven. But it prepares them to accept the inevitable, that they're going to die, and probably very soon. So, but before they die, it's very important from the Catholic perspective for that individual to express and to confess. And what they are expressing is their contrition. The priest will ask them, are you sorry for all your sins? it's basically the act of contrition. It's basically confession before you die. That's a big part of the last rites. But then there's also anointing with holy water and anointing with oil and some other things that, generally speaking, the last rites are given in private. It's only between the priest and the person who's dying. So there's prayer involved, but yes, there's confession involved, and holy water and holy oil, so anointing, and some other rituals around the same concept, preparing the soul to leave this physical body, to leave this mortal existence, and enter into eternal life with Christ. So most religions have some kind of preparation for death. All cultures have preparation of the body for burial. So all cultures have like a burial ceremony of some kind, not burial ceremony, a funerary ceremony. If Azazel was still here, he'd probably get a kick out of this story and what a Viking funeral is, right? You put the dead Viking warrior in a boat, you push the boat out to sea, and then you shoot an arrow, a fiery arrow into it, and you light the boat on fire. So the deceased Viking first gets cremated, and then the boat sinks and his ashes get absorbed into the sea. That's the Viking funeral, famous Viking funeral. So all cultures have a funerary ceremony. We're not certain how many cultures have a ritualistic, spiritual preparation for death ceremony. We're guessing that most mystery schools and most religions that are essentially death cults must have something. Like, for example, Tibetan Buddhism will, and ancient Egyptian. Well, we have the Book of the Dead. So again, that's something that is read after the individual's passed away. But it could just as easily be read to them on their deathbed, and it's probably no reason why it wouldn't be. And again, preparing them for what's going to come next. But we honestly don't know from experience, and therefore we can't say for certain. But why are we telling you all this? Why are we dwelling on this? Because when a humanity is on his deathbed, a holy man, a Bodhisattva, comes to that humanity to prepare humanity for its death. And the point of the last rites is you are preparing the soul for its transition, for its passing into the afterlife. And individuals who come to prepare a humanity for its destruction are speaking to the whole of humanity, but really their message is directed at the soul of humanity. Those individuals who are awake or awakening, those who are on the edge of the light, those who have the longing for something else, to help get them into the ark that will transport them from hell to the next world. But we don't mean the afterlife. We literally mean the next humanity, the next age, the golden age. Put another way, you look at the story of Noah, what goes into the ark? Two things go in an ark. the seeds for the next world, the seeds for the next humanity. In other words, the physical bodies of the animals, 2 by 2, man and woman. And the law, the teachings. And we know that from the Ark of the Covenant, the golden ark, the golden box that carried the shattered tablets on which were the 10 Commandments. Those are both arks. There's only 2 arks in the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant and the Ark of Noah. So there's 2 things that belong in the ark. Azazel says, I'm still here, preparing for bed. Please don't shoot an arrow at it. You shouldn't have said that, because at some future point at a retreat, if we ever have a retreat on the lake, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night floating in the middle of the river and your bed's going to be on fire. That's a prank that's just too good not to pull on someone from Sweden. Oh, and you were sleeping so heavily, we just assumed. And Tiffany says, the death of this humanity, so beautifully explained, Atlas. Thank you. Well, you're welcome. So when we say that we're an ark builder, and we're speaking to the soul of humanity, all of this, comes the contents of the book, for example, in that context makes so much more sense why we wrote that book and why we will be doing what we're doing as we move forward, and why, for example, we worked prematurely on Peapod Life, but nonetheless we have which this is right, we have this technology, ecosystem advanced human habitat, right? ESA, ecosystem advanced human habitat. These are indoor high order rainforest ecosystems, and as we envision it, a community, and we may call this community the ARC, the Atlas Residential Community, and the Atlas Research Center. And these are just concept drawings, or we should say concept renderings. But the point is that under this central ecodome is this pyramidal ecosystem. And you can see that it has an entrance into the pyramid. And inside this pyramid, just like the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, there is a place to meditate. So this pyramid, empowered by a high order rainforest ecosystem, will be a place where if you meditate inside of a high order rainforest ecosystem configured as a pyramid with all of the geometry correct and with the orientation correct and everything else, this is going to produce miracles in individuals' lives. And to the degree that the Atlas Project has inspired and united enough like-minded kindred spirits, what will be born out of these Atlas residential communities and or Atlas research centers, both ARC, A-R-C, but you obviously pronounce it ARC, but ARC, A-R-C is also the curve, right? The curve in the bridge. It's the trajectory, the path that a force takes to get from to bridge a gap. to get from one place to another. This is why bridges have arches in them. And we have that meme that we've described before and we've shown many, many times. The arc and the arch are closely related. Arc and arch. And they're closely related on so many levels. And this is one of our favorite memes, actually, that we've made. Not least because it's so relevant to our work. So again, here we see the Ark of the Covenant. There's the square on the Tree of Life. Well, we got to move our thing over here. I don't know if we have tools to... We can't draw on this one, right? There is a way for us to set it up so we could draw on it, but we're not going to draw on it. It's going to take too much time. So here's the square. You have Chesed, Geburah, Binah, and Hokmah. And then in the middle, you have Dat. Da'at is gnosis. Da'at is knowledge, self-evident experiential knowledge, which is what we said, one of the things that goes inside the ark, right? And then you see the two cherubim. They form the upper triangle of the Tree of Life. Keter, Hokmah, Binah. That's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Divine feminine, divine masculine, and union of divine feminine and masculine. That's the edifice of the temple. And then you have the square box, Ark of the Covenant, inside which is the knowledge. But then below that, you have the inverted pyramid, the inverted triangle of Chesed, Geburah, and Tipereth. That's the causal body, the Buddhic body, and the Atmic body. In other words, you have the monad. This is the monad. And what is the monad? The divine vessel of being. And what is the Ark of Noah? It's a vessel. It's a vessel of knowledge, but it's also a vessel of being. And Tipereth is the human soul. You see, so the arcs are symbolic of what's in the supernal worlds. So when we say, like we did last week, that we are here concerned about your immortal soul, that we are here concerned about monads, here it is right here. An ark builder, yes, there is a terrestrial aspect. There is a practical terrestrial aspect to the ark that we're here to build. But the focus is this is not a bunker. This is not an underground thing. There is no place here for 5 million cans of Campbell's soup and 50 million rounds of AR-15 ammunition. Tiffany says, what? I want to meditate in the eco pyramid. She says, that's just amazing. Why didn't you start today's lecture with this? Your show, I know, but wow. Because all of this is just still vaporware. We have no resources to build this yet. So we'll get there. It'll happen. But stepping stones, right? We gotta get there slowly but surely. But you see now that it is the struggle, it is the reality of death. It is the struggle, the conflict, the suffering that will inspire and unite. Because we can't do this alone. We can't build these things by ourselves. We certainly can't finance them by ourselves. And even if you build it, you have to rally people. You have to attract the souls. And rest assured, we build one of these, they will come. The souls will come. The monads will come. just as all of you are here. We didn't coerce you, we didn't bribe you, we didn't buy you, we didn't threaten you, but you're here. You found your way here. It's the first step toward having a place on the ark, to being able to live in an Atlas residential community, to be able to meditate in a high order rainforest ecosystem every day. To have a shot at being a part of the golden age, the next humanity on this planet. This is why there are two T's in Atlas. Because of the two pillars of the tree of life and this arch, the Arc de Triomphe. You can see it there, just very faintly. You can see it here, right? The little Arc de Triomphe, and here above, in behind, you have the yellow arc. You have the bronze or the brown colored Noah's Ark, and then in the back you have these white lines, and you see this arch here. That's the Arc de Triomphe. And the two T's of Atlas, as we've explained many times, are the, let's just, there. They're the Torii gate. This is the gate at the entrance of every Buddhist temple and Buddhist shrine and temple in Japan. There's a Torii gate. And if you notice, those are two T's. That's why there are two T's in Atlas. Because an arch is the strongest form in nature. It is the strongest form in architecture. And it represents a doorway from where you are to where you need to be. And it also represents the structure of every bridge, to bridge every gap. And an arc, when you think about lightning or you think about electricity arcing from one electrode to another, that is the course, the path, that force, that energy, that light takes to get from one electrode to another. It arcs. And then, of course, the ark is a container. It's a vessel. It's all related. It's all related. And we have also said often that we've done this work before. And all we will say is that Atlantis takes its name. Atlantis gets its name from Atlas. We've done this work before. We've established a humanity before. We've established a golden age before. We've done this work. And just today, on our morning walk, we were walking and we came upon a little old lady and her little dog, and she said, "Oh my goodness, you walk fast." She says, I looked behind me and I saw you, and then all of a sudden you caught up to me. And she goes, "Oh boy, you walk fast." And she's just this little short little lady. And I said to her, I said, well, we started talking. I said, "Well, don't be surprised, ma'am." I said, look, my hips. Look at where my hip bone starts. My hip bone is at your shoulder height." And she said, "Oh," she says, "Yeah, you're right." She says, "No wonder, right?" And we got into a very pleasant conversation. And I told her, I said, if the rest of my body was proportional to the length of my legs, I'd be at least 7.5 or 8 feet tall. I'd be a giant. the Lemurians and the Atlanteans were giants. It's just that if I was 8 feet tall, I'd be a complete freak in this humanity. So the it was arranged that somehow the genetics wouldn't work out, would work out where I would have very strong. I would have the legs of a giant, but the upper body and the torso of a not exactly a midget, but not a giant. So this is what keeps us within a reasonable range. So we ended up being 6'3" and not 7.5 or 8 feet tall, because if we were 7.5 or 8 feet tall with our build, with our strength, we would be a total freak. We would be completely we would just not fit in or blend in at all, right? We'd be Atlantean or a very small Lemurian, let's say. So, but anyway, that's all we have to say about that. But it's important to say, though, because Tiffany here asks, like, is there no collective undertaking? Is there no collective unity? Is there no great project for humanity anymore? Or is it just about individuals awakening and individuals finding self-realization? Is it only about personal sovereignty? Is there no hope for humanity as a whole anymore? Well, there is. Not for the whole of humanity, not for everybody. But we wouldn't have been giving today's lecture if we didn't still have hope, and if we still didn't know that there are many kindred spirits who yet do not know about us. They do not know about the Atlas Project. They do not know, just as you didn't know, Tiffany, until today. You didn't know about what we call Ecosystem Advanced Human Habitat, ESA, what was formerly branded as Peapod Life when we first tried to make a go of this, and we tried to raise money to build one of these communities here in Ontario. We couldn't attract any money because we need the right investor. So nothing happens before its time. And we know that there are plenty of very, very wealthy individuals who know something is wrong. They know that this humanity has gone awry, and they are searching. They are starving for innovations and projects that are metaphysical in nature. There are many people who know intuitively that this humanity is bumping up against the glass ceiling of materialism and physicality. They know intuitively that it's time for our science to break that glass ceiling and embrace the metaphysical sciences. And when we do that, this whole of humanity will shift its focus away from all the IT and everything else. And AI, if we're going to put AI to work for anything, it's going to be to help do the complex mathematics and that are higher dimensional mathematics. And we'll move away from trying to steal the soul of humanity, and there will be a new rekindled energy, a new vitality for this new project. And what is that project? It's the Atlas Project, or at least that's what we call it. And that's why we're here. And you are a part of it. You might not have known that until now, but there it is. And there are many, 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 many more members of this humanity that are not yet a part of it because it has not yet been time to reveal it to them. Because, as we shared in this lecture today, what it's going to take is the right crisis, if you will, the right crisis of spirit, of the human spirit, to inspire them, to motivate them, to unite them. And there it is. But it is possible. It's why we are here. If it was not possible, we wouldn't be here. This is our job. This is our work. This is our specialty. This is what we do. This is what we do. We help humanities face death. And if you have read when you get through to that part of our book, or if you've read our article on the Divine Mother on our blog, you will know that we've already performed this function for our biological mother on her deathbed when she was facing cancer. And she was in denial. And it was only when it finally hit her how serious it was and that she was dying and that she was going to die. It's when the priest showed up to give her the last rites. And we've recounted the tale before, and we write about it, as you say, in our book on the blog. But our mother, when she saw the priest show up, our mother, she looked at us so frail and so vulnerable and so afraid. And she looked at us and she said, "Son, I'm afraid." That's all she could get out is out. But we, looking directly into her eyes, we could see how absolutely terrified she was. And so we asked the priest to sit down on one side of the hospital bed, and we were on the other. And I gestured to the priest to take my hand. And I took my mother's hand, and the priest took my mom's other hand. So we made a chain, a triad of people with our hands clasped, palm to palm, right over left, always right over left, never the reverse. It's always right over left, because the right hand gives and the left hand receives, because the right hand is masculine and the left hand is feminine. And energy flows from masculine to feminine, from the giver to the receiver. That's the nature of the relationship between the yin and the yang. And we held hands there, and I just looked to my mother's eyes and I said, "Let us pray." I said, "Holy, blessed Divine Mother, prepare them," and I looked into my mom's eyes, telling that, "Don't be afraid, because right now in heaven, all of the angels, the choir of angels, they're all warming up their voices. They're all tuning their instruments. And the word has been given, and a great resounding voice echoes in the halls of Amenti. Prepare the largest gate and roll out the biggest red carpet, because a giant among women will soon be amongst us." And that choir, Mother, when you walk through that gate and when you walk the red carpet, that choir is going to be singing the fourth movement from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And 1,000 angels are going to be singing the Ode to Joy. And in their hearts, they're going to be singing it with the resounding feeling that our sister has returned home. And my mother, still not flinching from looking at us directly in the eyes, she said, "Son, I'm not afraid anymore." In that moment, we had exorcised my mother's fear. not the priest. The priest was silent. He couldn't add anything, except at the end, after my mom had said, "Son, I'm not afraid anymore," the priest said, "May this prophecy come true, as spoken." That's what he said. So I kissed my mom lovingly on the forehead, and I left her room to allow the Catholic priest to administer the last rites in accordance with my mom's religion. The same religion that I was brought up in, but by then I was no longer self-identified as a Catholic. So preparing souls for death comes with the job. And telling people that humanity is at its end is just about the most thankless job there is. So, which is why this has been thematic now, last week and prior to, and how it's been unfolding for us, and why it's so important not to be attached to how people react and receive what we have to give. And people shoot the messenger, right? People don't like getting bad news. It's just simple as that. And many people will be in denial. They won't want to hear it. They will have nothing to do with it. Just as in the time of Noah, just as in every time that we've done this. It's just the way it is. So, and those, I mean, it's foretold in the book of Revelations as well. There will be great suffering and gnashing of teeth. There will be great wailing and gnashing of teeth. All those who refuse to prepare for the inevitable because they think they can live forever. They think their bunker is the answer. They think their remote island fortress that billionaires are building. They're building them. Island fortresses like James Bond layers on remote islands. It's a real phenomenon. But that's not going to save them. You might save their physical body for a while, but it's not going to save their soul. That's what the ark is really for, because the seeds that plant the next humanity on this planet, they have to be the best seeds. You cannot create and establish a golden age with rotten seeds. Seeds that have not sprouted or are incapable of sprouting. You don't put seeds like that in an ark. So how do you know what are the good seeds? Well, in the face of suffering, in the face of struggle, in the face of sacrifice, who is inspired by that? Who is united behind the cause associated with that? Who steps up and says, what can I do? Or who steps up wherever they are in isolation and says, I don't know what I can do, but I must do something. The fire that burns in my heart demands that I do or say or act. I must do something. I must be a part of the solution, whatever that may be. And so in time, when the struggle, the suffering, the sacrifice is great enough in scale, is visible enough in scope, reaches the four corners of the world, the inspiration will begin, and the unification will begin, and the motivation will begin. And individuals who have been hungering and waiting for something, they know not what, but something to show up in their lives. When they see it, when they're confronted by it, the light will come on. The flame will spark. and they will be ignited, and they will know this is it. This, I have to be a part of this. I have to make sure this happens. And I need to be sure that I make my contribution to this. Because no one man can build an ark. It's fine for the allegory, for the story in the Bible that Noah built the ark. Yeah, Noah built the ark, but no one man can build an ark. That's fine for the storybooks. But the reality of this is very different. But as we pointed out today, how you inspire and how you unite, this is another aspect that the Bodhisattva know how to do better than anyone. Because only someone walking the path of the Bodhisattva agrees to that level of struggle and suffering and sacrifice on behalf of humanity, that they can inspire and unite members from that whole humanity. So you will all be witnesses. You will all be witnesses. You can say that you were there at the beginning, at the ground floor, before all of this was just vaporware, was just blah 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 talk on a Sunday afternoon, and not so pretty renderings on the screen. But hopefully you will be recounting those stories with like-minded, kindred spirits on the inside of one of these things, or something like it, something that resembles it, something that has this metaphysical technology inside. Hopefully you'll be a part of it when you recount these stories. I remember when Attlas had his measly little humble little live stream on Sunday afternoons, and he was showing us these renderings that he paid somebody $500 on Fiverr to do. And we don't have $500 to spend on renderings. We don't have that kind of money, and yet we found a way to have someone who had never done architectural renderings before, and he was inspired to do all of this work and produce these renderings that we think are pretty good for someone who had never done architectural renderings before. And by the way, this was not designed by an architect. We designed this. This whole design and everything is ours. Everything that you see here came to us in meditation. So there's no architect involved in any of this yet. This is all just pure inspiration. And the fellow we found was a really nice guy in the UK who did the renderings for us. He had never done architectural renderings before, so we think he did a pretty good job, and we were quite pleased. We were quite pleased for the amount of money that we paid. We were quite pleased with the outcome. Right? They've served us, very well, obviously. And there's more you can read about on this page. This is part of the Atlas project. You can read about some of the benefits of ecosystems and so on and so forth. We have another slideshow here of other installations and whatnot. Anyway, listen, does anybody have any other questions or comments? Oh, first of all, we have a couple comments. Roy says, hi, everyone. Hello, Roy. It was very nice for you to join us, or pop in and say hello anyway. And Tiffany said, yes, beautiful design, wonderful rendering. Your artist understood you. Well, he understood us. We had two-dimensional drawings to give him. Like, we did do a 2D sketch is not the right word. We had floor plans, we had measurements. We did it in a program called Visio. So he had visualizations to work with, and then in addition to that, he had our descriptions. But the bottom line is, as far as we're concerned, he definitely stepped up to the plate and he allowed himself to be inspired and to be moved by the project, such that he also recognized that it's a unique idea, and that because he saw the value of having architectural renderings in his portfolio, he felt that it's in his own best interest to make them very high quality, or very to really show off his talents. He really went beyond, above and beyond. So I think you can see that in the finished product, even if the final product won't actually look like that or exactly like that, because we have other architects in our circle and everything else who want to be involved, and so on and so forth. But anyway, we'll see how it all rolls out. So anyone have any other comments or questions? We'll wait, give people a chance to type away. In the meantime, we were scrolling to see if we could find the drawings, the renderings, but for some reason we only have like really rudimentary stuff, so don't know what happened to our 2D. We'll have to see. Oh, maybe it's not here. So anyone have any comments or questions? Never underestimate the power of suffering, struggle, and sacrifice to inspire others. Not everybody is going to be inspired, but there's always someone. And we have to put at least that much faith in humanity, that and our fellow brothers and sisters, that not everyone is so utterly asleep and utterly mechanical that they are beyond the capacity for inspiration, that they are beyond the capacity to be sparked and be lit. We must hold out hope that that's still possible, and that there are individuals who can be inspired and can be united and can be moved. We know that's true because otherwise we wouldn't be here doing this work, because this would be a total waste of our time and energy. Right? All right, then. We're going to go one last call for comments or questions. Mugaboo22 says, thank you for your service and teaching. Mugaboo, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. And it's an honor for us to do what we love. Right? We wouldn't do anything else. This is what we do. If no one has any more questions or comments. Oh, Supin Kashper says, thank you again for your inspirational words. Well, thank you for being here. Supin Kashper, thank you for being here again today. It's always nice to have you, and you're most welcome for the inspirational words. It's our pleasure and our passion. Benjamin says, thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights, sir. Thank you, Benjamin. And thank you for always, every time you are here, you always help remind us and inspire us of the integration of biblical parables. So we were definitely, you were on our mind when we mentioned the parable of the lost sheep and the shepherd who goes looking out for the lost sheep, and how that related to the Martian, and how it related to the topic of today, being inspired and united to go take action, and even putting oneself in harm's way for the sake of the lost sheep, and leaving the flock temporarily to go and collect the lost sheep. No man left behind. That's when we were mentioning to someone, and they said it's the Marines and other groups that have this philosophy, this code. It's no man left behind. We go back in there and get them, right? Tiffany says, Atlas, thank you. Always a treasure hearing what you have to share. Truly, peace always. Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you for being here. And trust us when we say we absolutely want you to be able to meditate in a pyramidal high-order rainforest ecosystem at some point within the next decade. Supan Kashpur says, I have a question for an upcoming live stream, since I think it might take too long. The question would be to showcase somehow instructionally the sixth right energy preservation for bachelors and bachelorettes. He says, I am struggling doing the body movements. Okay. So we're assuming that you have access. Okay, let's not assume that. We're assuming you have the access to the rites of rejuvenation on the Glorian website. When you say you're having difficulty doing the body movements, why can't we find the link? Here it is. Oh, he says, okay, since English isn't my first language, I feel seeing it would help. I was only reading how to do it. Okay. How would we do that on a live stream? On a live stream, it might be difficult. However, it might be possible or more reasonable to do on a private one-on-one. And he says, I'm aware there's certain parts that need to be left out on YouTube. So here's Supan Kashpur. Here's what we can do. Either next week or at some point, perhaps before the live stream or afterwards, you and I can have a private session, and I can demonstrate it much more effectively that way. If we do it on YouTube, there's going to be problems with the YouTube algorithm. There's going to be problems with YouTube if we do it live. So the other thing is, I could potentially demonstrate it and put it in a private video and then give you access to that video. So we don't necessarily have to do it live either. So, but tell you what, give us a week until at least like next weekend, and then we'll figure something out between now and then. And he says that I appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much. Yeah, no problem. We will figure something out. We will work something out. Okay. So just so everyone knows what Soup and Casper was referring to, we've shared this many, many times. And here it is again, the link to the Rites of Rejuvenation. And there's the link on the screen. And here is the web page. Okay, it's on the Glorian website. And there's a book, The Rites of Rejuvenation. And it's broken up into the 6 different rites. And Supin Kashpur is referring to the 6th rite, which its official name is the Vairoli Mudra, the transmutation for bachelors and bachelorettes. So this is what he was referring to, just so everyone knows, for your own reference point. And again, as he was describing, it's only a text description because it is obviously it's transmuting the sexual force. So the practice is it can be demonstrated, but it's difficult to demonstrate it publicly on YouTube because of the nature of the practice. So if you've studied the practice, then you will know what the potential hazards are of doing it publicly. So that's why I said I'll let Supin Kashpur have a private session, and then he'll have an opportunity to see what's going on and not just attempt to read it in a language that's not his first language. Any other questions or comments or concerns? We'll say last call, and then I'll also mention thank you, everyone, for joining us again today. It's always a pleasure. It's an honor, and it's a privilege to be here and offer you our words, our works, and an insight to where it seems we'll be heading and how things seem to be coalescing and coming together at last after half a century of walking this path in this lifetime. We've mentioned this also many times. Patience is a virtue. Whether you're the lone human being on a desolate planet, or you are a lost voyager on a desert island somewhere, or you are lost in the desert and wandering in the desert, like the Israelites, there's a reason why they say patience is a virtue. Patience. Nothing happens before its time. And the delay works in our favor when we comprehend the converging lines of cause and effect to create the perfect conditions for what it is that we are here to do. We don't want to force that and rush that and try to do it before the conditions are right. Or if we do, like Peapod Life, we'll end up with something that we have to put on hold. We have to put on the back burner. But at least we know what we want to do so that when the conditions are right, we are ready to do it. It's called getting your ducks in a row. But any frustration that we felt about why it wasn't working, why it wasn't going anywhere, that's because we were too early. We weren't ready for it. But certainly the world isn't ready for it yet either. It's got to get there. Got to wait for the world to catch up. Things have to get worse before they can get better, right? Someone has to get forgotten and left behind on Mars for the whole world to come together and try to save him, right? So we got to wait for Whatley to get left behind on Mars. And then we have to wait for whatever it is that needs to happen so we can get the world behind the Attlas project. But inspire and unite we will, because that's our job. Okay. Thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. Have a wonderful week. We hope that if you are in a northern climate, that weather is improving and that the sunshine and springtime has arrived and that the birds and the bees and everything is starting to show up. And Tiffany says, until next time, everyone. And that's a good way to say goodbye as any. Until next time, everyone, inferential peace. Take care. We'll see you next week.